They will present on the humanitarian aid program's work, our rebranding, and our future objectives. We will then have a 15-minute presentation from our first guest speaker, Leo Lin, followed by another 15-minute presentation from our second guest speaker, Angelina Aliabiba. After this, we will have a short 10-minute break before a 30-minute presentation from our keynote speaker, Susana Pavlou. The remaining 10 minutes of the conference will be a question and answer session. Throughout the conference proceedings, feel free to type in any questions that you have into the chat box. We look forward to fruitful discussions and engaging questions. Moreover, a quick note, for those that have registered and attending this event, we will receive a certificate of attendance. However, if you have not yet registered, but you still would like to request for a certificate, please contact us no later than Friday the 12th of March via email, and please state your full name. For those of you joining us today via Zoom, you may have noticed that we have shared a poll question at the beginning of the call. Please feel free to submit your answer at any time before the question and answer session. We are hoping that this conference will also be live streamed on Facebook. We have had some technical difficulties with this at the moment. So if it's not being live streamed yet, hopefully it will at some point. And it is currently also being recorded. So for those who do not wish to show your faces, you can switch your cameras off now. And for those who wish to promote and advertise this event on social media, please use the hashtag HAPIDW. Okay, let's begin with the conference. Please welcome my colleagues, Malaka Shledi and Tony Bankali. Thank you.
Thank you very much, Phoebe. Welcome everyone to the Humanitarian Programs online on gender equality. If you'd like to promote this conference, please go on social media and use the hashtag HAPIWD International Women's Day. Again, happy International Women's Day. I'm going to be giving a brief overview of Humanitarian Program. Who are we? What have we done so far? What are our objectives? So firstly, let me give a brief background. So the Humanitarian Program was founded in 2016 out of necessity as a response to the refugee crisis at that time. And gradually we've grown to accommodate other objectives and achieve many goals. So now HAP empowers young people to get involved in community action, research, and education initiatives. We create fundraisers, educational content, and awareness raising projects regarding various humanitarian issues. So at the core of it, we are a humanitarian organization. So what are our objectives? So our first objective is to collect donations for refugees at the refugee camp and to increase aid for refugees to improve the condition of refugees in general. This is why HAP was founded. Also, we collect donations and material items for children across Cyprus, also monetary donations for children across Cyprus because we're based in Cyprus at the moment. We also raise funds for women and children that are suffering from domestic abuse, in need of sanitary and hygienic products, health treatment, etc. And we raise awareness and educate on refugee and migrant issues, women's rights, and children's rights. So what is our work? What have we done so far? So far in 2019, we organized a fundraiser for the Women's Day, and it was very successful. And during the lockdown, we collaborated with SPAVOS to raise awareness on the effects of COVID on domestic violence. Also, our HAP representative, Phoebe Coles, who you just heard speak initially, represented HAP and presented a paper on women's rights at the Durham University online conference. We've also paid visits to the refugee camp, and we continue to organize various events to raise awareness on children's rights and collect donations for children's rights. A very notable event that we organized was in 2019 when we collaborated with the United Nations IOM to raise awareness on issues affecting Palestinian and Syrian refugees in Lebanon through photography. So far this has been our work, our objectives, and how HAP was founded. I'm going to hand over now to Malaka Shledi, who is also co-founder and director of HAP, and she's going to talk about our rebranding. Over to you, Malaka.
Thank you, Todi, and happy Women's History Month. We're very, very happy to have you all here. Thank you for your interest and enthusiasm. I'd like to extend my warm welcome to the presenters of today's event. I'm looking forward to hearing your research. I'm very excited to present to you the rebranding of HAP. We're renaming our organized group to Vicinus, which translates to neighbor. in Latin. And we're also changing our logo to holding hands. Now, we thought that the new name and the logo is appropriate and fitting for our group, since we focus on various issues, of all of which are of equal importance. And we believe that so long as we have the means, we all should attend to such humanitarian issues and contribute to bettering our society as a whole. At the end of the day, we are all one race, sharing Earth as home. So in a sense, and in a cheesy way, we are all neighbors and we should all look out for one another. So generally, Vicinus will still have the same objectives of HAP, which were previously highlighted by Todi. For the future objectives, we are very excited to tell you about the future plans. One of our main aims that we're working towards is to raise funds to register Vicinus as an NGO in Cyprus. The importance of registering as an NGO is evident through the fact that we'd be entitled to apply for funding on a national, regional, and international level. And through such monetary aid, we will be able to reach and help people on a larger scale. And that is ultimately our goal. Our next future aim is also to create an educational website on human rights issue. We want to provide a platform where we can raise awareness about ongoing humanitarian crisis and various ways we can help make a difference. The plan is to also create interactive online tools where people can learn about their human rights and how they can enforce their rights in case of any violations. The website will be completely free and can be used as a resource by professionals, teachers, activists, and anyone that is interested in the field. Now, how you can get involved. There are various ways for all of you to get involved with us. For example, you can volunteer if you're in Cyprus when we have events and need of assistance. You can also help contribute in writing articles where we can share them regarding any humanitarian issue of your choice. You can also help us by sharing our fundraisers, educational campaigns. So these are the articles I was just referring to, so they can reach a larger group of people. We regularly hold campaigns to collect donations in the form of clothing, toiletries, and other appliances. So you can always help contribute to such campaigns. And of course, you can become a member. And the application procedure will be shared soon through our social media platforms. So please keep an eye out for that. And this brings me to my last point of social media platforms. This is where you can find us. We are on various social media platforms. We are on Twitter, Instagram, LinkedIn, and Facebook. Though please note that we are currently in the process of rebranding. So once we have completely rebranded HAP, our social media platform handles will be changed accordingly to Vicinus. Thank you all for your attention and enjoy the rest of the conference.
Thank you, Malak and Todi, for your presentation. If anyone listening today has any questions to ask Todi or Malak, please type them in the chat box below for the question and answer session at the end. I'm just going to share the screen for the next speaker's presentation. I'm excited to announce our first guest speaker, Mr. Leo Lin. Leo Lin is a PhD candidate at the University of Southern Mississippi in the United States of America. He is an expert with the Global Initiative Against Transnational Organized Crime in Geneva. Furthermore, Mr. Lin has published a co-edited book on Asia-Pacific security and is currently writing a monograph on human trafficking and transnational crime, both with Springer International Publishing. Today, he will present his research on the topic of human trafficking in Southeast Asia, a comparative case study from the feminist human security perspective.
Thank you, Phoebe. Thank you, everyone. Hello from the United States, and this is my privilege and honor to attend the HAPE program in this conference. And today, my topic is human trafficking in Southeast Asia, a comparative case study from feminist human security perspective. Next slide, please. This is the brief outline. Today, I will break it down into several sections. It includes introduction, literature review, research question, methods, analytical framework, result, and conclusion. This is an ongoing research that I'm doing with one of my colleagues in Southeast Asia, and we are developing the methods and analytical framework as well. So this is not perfect, but we welcome you if you have any feedback or any suggestions. That'll be very much appreciated. Next slide, please. The aim of this research is to identify the pattern difference of human trafficking in Southeast Asia from the lens of feminist human security perspective. And some brief intro. Currently in Southeast Asia, human trafficking issue, we believe that is one of the focal points that we have to address right now, especially during the pandemic. We have found out that there are many problems, many issues there. Women, children are suffering. This is why we think this is important for us to do this research. So for the stats, you can find out, you can Google that from the internet. Basically, what it tells us is that things are happening and the situation is still severe. According to my past research, the human trafficking risks are actually increasing in the time of COVID-19. Next slide, please. This map is taken from the US State Department, the TIP report, just to give a sense that this is the area that we're working on. Next slide, please. A little bit definition of the term. I believe that many of you might have known about and familiar with those terms. Human security in the Human Development Report in 1994, it is defined as safety from chronic threats and protection from sudden harmful disruptions in the pattern of daily life. And Canadian government, I think it gives a good definition that catches the concept as well. Human security means freedom from pervasive threats to people's rights, safety, and lives. The components of human security includes economic, food, health security, environmental security, personal, physical, community, and political security. It is kind of broad, but I think it is a lens that we can use to look and examine the problems that we're facing. Next slide, please. A little bit literature review. There are different conceptions in human security debates. I don't want to go into that today because I only have 15 minutes. Essentially, it tells us that traditional security focus on states, human security is people-centered. In the issue of human trafficking of women and girls, we believe that we have to use and look through the lens of human security approaches. That will be better for us to address the roots of the problems. Because both approaches, traditionally, they neglect the threats women and girls face because expressions of masculinity have become the norm. The feminist perspective is important. That is our argument, because women and children are often victims of violence, organized crime, refugees, interstate conflicts, and other cruel and degrading behaviors. Next slide, please. The research question of this paper is, what is the pattern difference of Southeast Asia countries on human trafficking of women and girls? The dependent variable is human trafficking of women and girls, and the independent variables or the groups is Southeast Asian countries. Next slide, please. In this research, we use qualitative comparative case studies. We analyze the difference between two or more groups on dependent variables. This is a descriptive case studies, and the case that I would like to present today include Cambodia, Laos, Vietnam, and Indonesia. The reason why those four countries are chosen is because they are all source countries, more or less. They can be mixed, but essentially they're the source countries. The girls are trafficked from those countries to the more developed or more richer countries, for example, China, Thailand, or Malaysia. The data were collected from government reports, news reports, NGO reports. Basically, we are using secondary sources for this research at this moment. Next slide, please. In order to do and conduct this research, we have to do and develop an analytical framework. This is how we did it. First, we differentiate the actors or the entities. We differentiated state perpetrators and non-state perpetrators. State perpetrators include any actors within the state that can represent states. Police officers, military personnel, etc. For the non-state perpetrators, it includes those groups that cannot be considered as a state behavior. For example, terrorists, organized crime groups, transnational organized gangs. Those are the differentiation that we are using. Or, and we differentiated the type of violence. This is based on the research by McKay, 2004, that focuses on the activities of the human trafficking or the behavior in general, the violence. It is differentiated into two groups. One is direct violence that tend to focus on physical violence toward women, whereas the other is indirect or structural violence that is embedded in ubiquitous social structures normalized by stable institutions and regular experiences. In this sense, we would like to take feminist approach that is bottom-up approach, people-centered, women and girl focused when we analyze the issues, instead of the traditional approach that we tend to look at the problems through the lens of the states, from the governmental sectors, even from the civil society point of view. So this is what we're trying to do. Next slide, please. Based on the framework and the logic that we are using, and we adapted the research findings based on other scholars, we have made 2x2 table that it is easier for us to conduct a research and to compare and contrast our cases. Essentially, as you can see in the 2x2 table, there are 4 patterns. I don't want to read those descriptions. You can look at. What it tells us is that we can more or less differentiate different 4 groups that we can label different countries. By this way, that would make us easier to analyze the future issues, no matter what it is relating to the human trafficking issues of women and girls. Next slide, please. This same map, again, as you can see, those 4 countries are located in different geographical areas. But what I would like to show you is this is the case. These are the cases that we're investigating. Next slide, please. Although the time is short, I think it will be necessary to give a little bit description about the situation in each countries. Basically, situations are severe. For Laos, 90% of human trafficking from Laos occur to Thailand, and most of the victims are girls aged between 12 and 18 years old. And you can find out that there is a very serious number on the left side, that it is estimated that between 200,000 and 450,000 people are trafficked annually within the greater Mekong sub-region. Next slide, please. In Vietnam, yes, recorded of the years 3,400 victims of human trafficking since 2013, and over 90% of them are women and children. So here in the photo, it is a military officers busting a human trafficking groups. Next slide, please. In Cambodia, the situation is even worse. The country has significant child sex tourism problems. 35% of Cambodia's 15,000 prostitutes are children under the age of 16. 1/3 of the trafficking victims in prostitution are children. And then you can find some serious numbers. I don't want to go into that. You can read it by yourself to save some time. Next slide, please. In Indonesia, 43.5% of trafficking victims are as young as 14 years old. They're very young, just like what we found out in Cambodia. Additional 40,000 to 70,000 children who are not trafficked are victims of other sexual exploitation. Next slide, please. This is a brief summary of the initial findings. As what I have mentioned earlier, this is an ongoing research, and the purpose is to compare and label each country with the pattern difference that we created based on the framework that we use. In Cambodia, the police basically are involved and corruption happens everywhere. In Laos, the traffickers are more or less quite free in conducting their illicit businesses. In Vietnam, the sex traffickings are prominent, whereas the government officials has a lack of interagency coordination. In Indonesia, because of the islands, they have too many islands and a huge population, the governments are basically allowing some degree of zones or gray areas for the traffickers to manipulate and to exploit girls and women using the names under any companies that they created under Indonesian government's laws. There are gray areas that they can do, and the women and children have less voice to counter that. Next slide, please. Based on the 2x2 table, I we created this figure for you to have better sense about what it is all about. Vietnam, what we found out is that it has more non-state perpetrators involved, and the tendency of it is structural violence. Whereas in Laos, it involves more direct violence with non-state perpetrators involved in. With Cambodia and Indonesia, indirect violence or structural violence and state perpetrators are more or less the tendencies that we found based on the data. For the pattern 3, we did not found sufficient data to support. One of the discussions is that the reason is because in those 4 countries, government officials, they have corruption issues, and once the military personnel or the police officers or any government officials did something or involved in human trafficking activities, it tend to be covered up or it can not be revealed for the public or for the academia to do research. This is definitely a blind spot, and that may explain why we did not find out anything that pointing to pattern 3 from those 4 countries. Next slide, please. In conclusion, this research aims to find out the pattern difference of the countries that we selected. We have indeed found out that the patterns are more or less different in the countries that we examined. Also, we found out that the ineffectiveness of governments causes structural violence and allows perpetrators to use as a gray area to conduct their illicit businesses. Again, as I mentioned, personal violence may exist all across the cases. However, it may not be easy for us as a researcher to find out and make it a reliable data to examine. This requires more access, and it requires the government cooperation if we contact each country's government individually. For the possible contributions of this research is that first, this research developed a feminist human security typology for future analysis. And second, this is a preliminary second source analysis, and it brings some value and points or directions for future research. Thank you. And I welcome you if you have any questions or suggestions. This is the end of my presentation.
Thank you, Leo, for your interesting presentation. As Leo has said, if anyone listening today has any questions to ask Mr. Lin, please type them in the chat box below for the question and answer session at the end of the event. Our next guest speaker is Angelina Aliabiba. Ms. Alyabyeva has obtained a diploma from the Law College in Russia and is currently undertaking her undergraduate legal studies as a third-year law student at the University of Central Lancashire in Cyprus. She is a legal writer with a fair range of research skills and is the editor of the university's law blog. Additionally, Angelina is enthusiastic about human rights and has established her own online Instagram blog called Justice Press. Moreover, she is currently a research intern at Valaris and Valaris Law Firm, where she contributes towards a research project regarding the codification of Cyprus case law. Simultaneously, she is also undertaking an online legal internship in the commercial department at a leading global law firm called Linklater. Today, Ms. Alyabyeva will present her research on the topic of gender discrimination in the framework of equal pay for work of equal value in the European Union.
Good afternoon. Thank you so much for such introduction. I would like firstly to thank the Humanitarian Aid Program for organizing this conference and inviting me to present my topic. Also, I would like to add that this is my honor to be a part of the team and also to perform as a speaker in the framework of our online gender conference. If you do not mind, maybe can please share my screen because I have edited a bit my presentation.
No problem, I'll just stop sharing screen now.
Okay, thank you so much.
No worries.
You do not mind, give me only a few seconds. I'm going to share my screen now. Hopefully you are able to see now my screen. Can you see my screen now?
Yes, we can see it now. Thank you.
Okay, I'm going now to proceed to my presentation. I just want to, 1 second. Okay, yes. So the aim of this presentation is to give an overview of the gender discrimination and the understanding of equal pay for work of equal value in the framework of EU law. So we will start with explaining what do we mean by gender pay gap in the EU and also focus on the recent statistic from the official website of EU Commission. After we will look at EU anti-discrimination law, background and context. So we will explain why it's so important to protect and promote gender discrimination and equal pay in all EU member states, currently in all 27 member states, including Cyprus. After we'll discuss the definition of equal pay, and again, we will refer to case law from the Court of Justice, and also we will look at the definitions which are provided by different legal treaties and directives. Also, we'll look at the definition of work of equal value. And as I said before, we are going to focus on case law and legislation. Additionally, I haven't included these in my outline, but if I have time, I also will discuss the social impact of these, except the legal impact. And I will conclude my presentations with my recommendations, which are based only on my personal research regarding this issue. Before I start, I would like to ask whether someone is familiar with the term gender pay gap and what do they understand if, for example, they hear gender pay gap. And I would really appreciate if we have someone who can write this in the chat or raise the hand and talk, so we'll have more interactive presentation rather than me just talking. If no, it's also okay. I can proceed. Okay, I will not lose the time. So, by gender pay gap, we mean a different level of average income and pay between men and women. For example, if a representative of male gender receives 2,000 euro per month and a representative of female gender receives 1,500 euro per month for the same work of equal value, this is an issue. This can be defined as a gender pay gap. I have uploaded also the official statistic from European Commission. It's the recent statistic so far, as I could see, because I haven't found any updates yet regarding this statistic, and we can see that the gender pay gap in the EU remains at 16% and has only changed minimally over the last years. It means that women earn 16% on average less per hour than men. Gender pay gap can be caused by different factors, such as historical stereotypes in society and traditions, direct and indirect discrimination in the workplace, and also I will define these two terms as direct and indirect discrimination later on my next slide. So we will be familiar with the differences between direct and indirect discrimination. But as I said, the gender pay gap can be caused by different factors. Women have faced discrimination over many years, and unfortunately, it continues to exist today. Unequal pay has a significant impact on economic security. Employers believe that women are more likely than men to have work breaks related to having children, caring for sick family members, and fulfilling sometimes even family responsibilities. At the same time, employers though do not look at the real number of women's family responsibilities. They use subjective tests in order to understand that women are unstable and inefficient workers, and also it will be described and analyzed more deeply later on. The stereotype of women as unstable, inefficient employees affects the dynamics of dismissal of women, forming gender discrimination. And I would like to proceed to the legal background of discrimination law and explain why it's so important for the Union and especially also for Cyprus to abolish all gender discrimination issues and provide equal opportunities for everyone. It should be necessary to outline the fact that the core main principle of the European Union law or community law is equality and non-discrimination. I haven't stated this on my slide, but I really believe that I need to mention that the basis of all legal documents and the substance of the discrimination provisions was the Treaty of Lisbon, or it is also known as the Treaty on the European Union. Article 2 of the Treaty on the European Union, or also we can say Treaty of Lisbon, established that the gender equality and non-discrimination is one of the most important values of community or EU. Article 3, subsection 3 of the Treaty on the EU or Treaty of Lisbon, and Article 8 of another treaty of the Treaty on Functioning of the EU declared to promote equality between men and women. Article 10 of Treaty on Functioning of the EU requires all the member states to abolish discrimination based on sex or ethnic origin or gender. So we can see that the main legal document, the main legal treaty of the EU asks to abolish any potential gender discrimination which could appear even at the workplace. First thing, though, we need to define the term direct and indirect discrimination because it is very important to understand the difference between them. In the framework of EU law, direct discrimination can be defined as less favorable treatment on grounds of gender, gender characteristics, ethnicity, nationality, and other characteristics which also could be found later on in bibliography, which I also attached. Whether indirect discrimination puts another person at specific disadvantage compared with another person. And I believe that it's very important to give an example of the indirect discrimination so everyone can understand what do we mean by indirect discrimination, because I believe that understanding of gender direct discrimination is not something very difficult, whereas indirect discrimination can cause some question. So indirect discrimination, essentially, this is a practice or a policy or a rule which applies to everyone in the same way, but it can have a worse effect on some people than others. And I would like to use the example of stairs. For example, stairs are the same for everyone, but some people cannot use them. For example, disabled people. It doesn't mean that there is a direct discrimination, but there is indirect discrimination. So this was a short overview regarding the difference between indirect discrimination and direct discrimination. There are the following types of legislation prohibited discrimination in the EU. However, several laws will be outlined as part of my presentation. So I will start briefly with discrimination regarding nationality. It's Article 18 of Functioning of the EU, but it's not relevant. Discrimination regarding sex and gender. Article 157 of Treaty on Functioning of the EU, which ensures that the equal treatment in conditions of employment and access to equal pay is protected and provided. It has the direct horizontal effect, which means that individuals can enforce this article in their domestic courts, their national courts. And also, this article, of course, provides an equal security for everyone. Based on this article, we also have Equal Treatment Directive, which was implemented in national legislation or every member state in the EU. However, it also should be noted that Article 157 of Treaty on Functioning of the EU has double aim in establishing the equality, not only regarding economical aspect, but also for the purpose of social security through equality between genders. And I would like to look at the case law or the Court of Justice in order to see how we fight with gender discrimination issues through years. I will share now. 1 second. Okay. The judicial practice of the Court of Justice provides with important examples of the law where the anti-discrimination legislation of community law was implemented and also transferred in practice. So the leading case and landmark case is the Defren against Sabine. In this case, the Court of Justice emphasized on the respect for fundamental human rights for individuals, including the elimination of discrimination. By elimination, I mean a full destruction and abolishment of discrimination based on sex, gender. It was a landmark case as well because it gave a recognition of direct effect of the Article 157 of Treaty on Functioning of EU. So, if, for example, an individual in France has a gender discrimination issue where he was treated less favorably in the workplace because of his or her gender, he or she can enforce her rights under the national law practice or go to the domestic court and rely on Article 157 in order to achieve justice and abolish his or her issue with regards to gender discrimination. This is why I want to outline that Article 157 and the case of Defren is very important for the law practice with respect to gender and anti-discrimination law. Additionally, in the case of telecom, it was established that the economic background of Article 119 of community law, I would like to also add, I'm sorry, I didn't specify that Article 157 also can be sometimes referred as Article 119 of EEC, is a secondary to the social purpose of equality between male and female, and it protects the fundamental principle of human rights. What I want to say about is that this article and this case gave us explanation that not only the economic aspect of protection, the equality between genders, but also the social aspect was taken into consideration. So from this it follows that the society, particularly if we have these issues with inequality between genders, suffers from a well-recognized protection of human rights and of course injustice. Also, I would like to start with the definition of equal pay, because I believe that I do not have a lot of time to discuss all cases, even though I wanted to do so, but I will start with the definition of equal pay. Legal framework regarding equal pay has Article, again, 157, and particularly 157 subsection 2, which defines the pay as the ordinary basic or minimum wage or salary and any other consideration, whether in cash or in kind, which the worker receives directly or indirectly in respect of his or her employment from his/her employers. Why I have stated this definition is to give an overview of what do we mean by pay in the legal framework in order to proceed with equal pay. So we can see that Article 157 subsection 2 defined as the pay, but Directive 75/117 of Community, also we can refer to it as the Equal Pay Directive, deals with gender discrimination, and Directive 76/207 of Community deals with the Equal Treatment Directive with gender and relative status. However, I would like to note that these two directives were replaced by one directive, 2006/54 of European Community, and particularly Article 4 of this directive eliminates direct and indirect sex discrimination, gender discrimination, and different conditions or remuneration. And Article 14, the definition of remuneration and remuneration also will be provided later on. According to the established principle of the Court of Justice, Article 118 or Article 157 and Article 141 subsection 1 and 2 of the Community Treaty currently enforced and are directly applicable in member states. By directly applicable in member states, I will emphasize again on the fact that individual can go with his issue to the domestic court and enforce it if he or she feels that he was treated less favorable because of his gender characteristics. So there is a case law which has been developed by the Court of Justice and played a key role in the development of the principle of equal pay, and also emphasized on the fact that the term pay used in EU law should be broadly interpreted. So I will start with the case of Garland. This case was concerned about travel concessions, but the general principle was that under EU law, not contractual benefits are also covered by equal pay. By non-contractual benefits, for example, long service award, discretionary bonuses for an excellent job or performance, whatever falls under the category of non-contractual benefits. Simon Smith case has confirmed that unfair dismissal compensation also falls under the equal pay category. Okay, we have talked about the Finance Sabine case of Lloyds Bank, case 6980 established also the principle regarding the exclusion of indirect discrimination in the context of equal pay. And the case of Bilka was also very important because In this case, the Court of Justice decided to include in the definition of equal pay occupational or supplementary pensions received during the employment relationship. And also have a last case, it's the case of Barber. The court held that payments of benefits to employees can be also defined as pay. It is important though to outline that free collective bargaining cannot be applied to the justification of unequal work for equal value, but this is another topic which unfortunately I cannot develop within my presentation and our conference. So I will go to the definition of work of equal value. Article 141 of the treaty establishing the European Community, renamed as TFEU, provided us that the work of equal value is the principle of remuneration without discrimination on grounds of gender and marital status with regard to all aspects of paying conditions. Article 4, subsection 2 of Consolidated Recast Equality Directive 2006-54 establishes the definition of work of equal value. So it says, where a job classification system is used for deciding pay, it shall be based on the same criteria for both men and women, and so drawn up as to exclude any discrimination on grounds of sex. Well, I have a procedure here how to establish a case of pay discrimination for work of equal value for employees. So it can be established on balance of probabilities that there has been discrimination or not. However, the burden of proof to show that they didn't discriminate is on the employer. And it was shown in the case of Danfoss and thereby. How is it possible? This will be explained in detail in the next slide. Work of equal value. However, there are objective differences, though, where violation of this principle can be justified because of the following reasons in comparable situations. By referring to the objective difference, I would like to outline that there are some occasions when the gender discrimination can be justified because of particular reasons, and as it was said by me a few minutes ago, it's on the employer to prove that what he has done could be justified. So Article 9 of the Directive 2006-54 states that a comparable situation can be based on the nature of the work, training, and the working conditions. For example, if a work requires particular skills which cannot be obtained by a representative of female gender because of the physical nature, for example, of representative of female gender, or because they require exactly high working skills, in a sense of physical high working skills, it can be justified, but once again, it's on the employer to justify it. Provisions regarding the protection of women, particularly as regards pregnancy and maternity, Article 28, subsection 1, Equality Regards Directive. So, for example, if a representative of female gender is pregnant and she is not allowed to perform particular duties, and because of this, her salary is not equal to a male's gender salary, it may not mean that the gender discrimination wasn't justified. Because of her pregnancy, she cannot perform the duties. So it was also applied in the case of Bilka, where the Court of Justice held where objective differences can be applied to particular situations, excluding gender discrimination, and it can be proved that they are necessary and proportionate. Employers' difference must be relevant and true. I think that I'm running out of time, so I will go to recommendations and conclusions. So my recommendations, first of all, is that in order to prevent discrimination, employers' practice must be transparent, as was shown in the Danfoss case, which unfortunately I don't have enough time to explain. Additionally, it may be necessary to limit actions that will benefit individual employee and lessen effect of the discrimination as well. For example, provide an employee, regardless his professional experience, an opportunity to prove that he can improve a working performance and be suitable for a position. With regard to a social background, the gender pay gap still exists, unfortunately, and it increases poverty, complaints, and undermines the national economy. Therefore, strategic engagement for gender equality 2016-2019 plan will in the future develop the transparency by introduction the law on level of equal pay and its benefits. So to sum up all facts, we can see that the core principle of community law, which is inequality and non-discrimination, despite the strong legal framework and protection by Article 157 of Treaty on Functioning EU and other directives and treaties, is an object of violation. And based on recommendations which I have stated on my slide, I would like to conclude my presentation, and I would like to thank everyone for being with me and listening to me. Thank you so much.
Thank you, Angelina, for your educational and interesting presentation. If anyone listening today has any more questions to ask her, please put them in the chat box below. And maybe if we have time during the question and answer session, if there was anything that Angelina wanted to touch upon more and describe a bit more in detail, we may be able to do that then. I asked for the question and answer session and for the next presentation for the speakers to have their cameras on. But for now, we're going to have a short 10-minute break, and I hope to see you again soon in 10 minutes. Thank you again. See you soon. Hi everyone, just going to give people a few more minutes to come back to the call, and then we will resume shortly. Thank you. We'll start in about 2 minutes. Welcome back, everyone. I hope you have enjoyed our conference thus far, and I look forward to the fruitful discussions and questions at the end. But before that, we have a presentation from our keynote speaker, Susana Pavlou. Susana has over 15 years of experience in research, policy development, policy monitoring and evaluation, with particular expertise on gender equality and violence against women. She is widely recognized as a gender equality expert and has served as a senior researcher on a number of projects and studies commissioned by the European Institute for Gender Equality, the European Parliament, and United Nations Women, amongst others. Susana has served as a national expert for the Network of Experts in Gender Equality, Social Inclusion, Health and Long-Term Care, and as an independent expert for the DG Employment's Mutual Learning Programme. She has also served as an expert for the EWL Observatory on Violence Against Women, and as a board member and member of the Executive Committee of the European Women's Lobby. She's currently president of the National Advisory Committee for the Prevention and Combating of Family Violence and is a board member of the WAVE Network. Moreover, Susana has co-authored and contributed to a number of publications, including research reports, books, chapters, and journal articles, and has conducted various training seminars and workshops on a range of gender equality issues. And that is just some of the things that she has achieved. Today, Susana Pavlou will present on the interesting topic of advocating for women's rights in Cyprus. Thank you.
Thank you, Phoebe, for the introduction. It's very strange having those words spoken back to me, but thank you so much. And thank you to the Humanitarian Aid Programme for inviting me for the keynote speech at your conference today in celebration of International Women's Day. I'm going to share my screen with you, okay? And just give me a shout out if you can see it. And if I can just, right.
We can see it.
Brilliant, thank you. Thank you so much. Okay. So what I'm going to do today, so as Phoebe said, I will be talking about a little bit about my organization and how we advocate for gender equality and women's rights in Cyprus. We can ignore this because it's not relevant, right? So I'm going to say a little bit about the organization I've been working for the last 16 years now. And then go into some of the women's rights issues, gender equality issues that we are addressing. So I'll give some sort of background on what the situation of women's rights is in Cyprus in various sectors. I can't cover all of it, but it's just to give a flavor of where we are today. And then I'll talk a little bit about how my organization is trying to tackle and address some of those issues. Okay, so who are we? I'm the director of the Mediterranean Institute of Gender Studies. It's a non-governmental, non-profit organization. It's affiliated to the University of Nicosia. We were established by a group of very passionate and forward-thinking, visionary young women and researchers in the year 2000, with the aim to eliminate all forms of discrimination against women and promote gender equality in Cyprus, and linking that, which is something really important to us, to the Mediterranean region and the EU. So when we were set up in 2000, it was, just to give a little bit of context, we don't have a very strong tradition in history of women's rights activism in Cyprus. So we did not have a vibrant, independent women's movement in the same way that perhaps were manifested in other countries in Europe, in the United States, and so on. Mainly because, I won't get into it, but just to give a bit of context, mainly because of we were made independent in 1960s in the Republic of Cyprus, and from then onwards we've been mainly preoccupied with the national problem of ethnic conflict and the sort of de facto division of the country since 1974. And this discourse of nationalism and ethnic conflict has dominated the human rights sort of discourse and public dialogue in Cyprus. And that sort of overshadowed a lot of other human rights issues, including women's rights issues. And before entering the European Union in 2003 and 4, the women that set up and founded our organization felt that it was really important that we begin to start collecting data and addressing the many, many human rights and women's rights issues that exist in Cyprus. So that's a little bit about who we are. These are some of our values: equality, cooperation, empowerment. You can see them on the screen, that are quite self-explanatory. Okay, so we're not a single issue organization, and we're not a service provision organization. We work on a range of issues because we strongly believe that all women's rights issues are interrelated and connected. So our vision is to have a world free from violence. So we work as one of our main priorities is combating violence against women and girls. Stronger women, stronger economy. So we're looking at labor market inequality issues, women in employment, entrepreneurship, and women in economic decision making. One of the main areas of our work as well is empowering young people through education, whether it is interventions in education to prevent gender-based violence or to address gender segregation in subject and study choices, agency and rights for migrant women. It is also really an issue very close to our hearts. And the work that we do is with migrant women and for migrant women, and looking particularly at the rights of domestic workers in Cyprus, which is the largest population of migrant women in Cyprus, but also refugee and asylum-seeking women, and media transparency and equality. And I'll talk a little bit about these things as we get through. So myth or reality, because we often feel, or I often hear, particularly from young people in Cyprus, that sex-based discrimination and gender inequality in Cyprus has almost been eliminated. And in fact, this is a myth. So, and I'll go through some of the issues that we are addressing. So I'm going to sort of cover the issues that are addressed in AGES, which is the European Institute for Gender Equality's Gender Equality Index 2020, that looks at the various sectors where in our society and our institutions where inequality still exists. And these are the scores for Cyprus. They're out of 100. Our overall index is 56.9 out of 100 points, and we rank 21st in the EU on the index, which is 11 points lower than the EU score. So in other words, our country ranks among the lowest in the European Union. Okay, and I'll go through some of these issues. So we'll start with gender inequality in the labor market. Okay, and I don't want to read out some of these stats to you. You can see them pretty clearly on your screen, that women's employment rate has always been lower compared to men's, and this is similar to other countries as well, at 67%. We have one of the highest rates of gender segregation in employment in the EU, and I'll just say a few words on that because it's related to also our previous conversation, our previous presentation on the gender pay gap. The gender pay gap in Cyprus is 13.7%. Okay, so it's a little bit lower than the EU average of 16%, as Angelina presented to us earlier. But this is mainly due to gender segregation in employment, okay, which is very profound in Cyprus. And what I mean by gender segregation in employment, I mean vertically and horizontally. Horizontally, in that women and men dominate different sectors of our economy, right? And men dominate those sectors which are higher paid, higher valued, I would say, higher valued and higher paid. And women dominate those sectors of employment which are less valued and less paid. And why do I say less valued? Because that's what's key, right? It's how we value women's work that leads to it being paid less, okay? And then there's vertical employment segregation, where men are found in the same sector. Education is a very good example, because education is a women-dominated sector, over 75% dominated by women, education, but men are found at the highest ranks of education, while women dominate the lowest ranks. So gender disparity in pay is not only to do with direct discrimination. So I hire Phoebe and Leo for the same job, same qualifications, same job description, and I pay them differently, which also exists. We heard Angelina analyze that quite extensively, but it also exists because of gender stereotypes, how they influence our subject choices, study choices, and where we are in the labor market and how we value different types of work, okay? So we also have a very high rate of part-time employment, which also explains to a certain extent the gender pay gap. If part-time employment was taken into account, our gender pay gap would be higher. Because the gender pay gap is calculated in hourly earnings, but if it's calculated with monthly earnings, where the part-time employment would be taken into account, the pay gap would be over 20%. Okay. Yes, and the unemployment rate for women is higher. And I'm sorry, in my slide it says in the EU, and I mean in Cyprus. So sorry for that. And gender disparities in the labor market also lead to gender disparities in the pension gap. Cyprus is among the countries with the largest pension gap in Europe, as women over 65 receive on average 38.5% lower pensions. And you can see where Cyprus is on the screen. Okay, and this reflects, the multiple economic, social, political inequalities that women face, right? The gender pay gap, which are associated with working conditions and pay, where we are in the labor market, our opportunities for promotion and for career development. As I said, gender segregation, male-dominated occupations, female-dominated occupations, where women have less opportunity for career development and higher pay. The fact that managerial and high-paid positions are disproportionately held by men, which also reflects the bias in recruitment and promotions. The gender gap in care, which, as we know, and has been felt quite acutely over the last year during the pandemic and the associated restrictions, that women take on a disproportionate share of care work. And this is set in a backdrop of inadequate welfare state and services for childcare and the care of dependent family members, such as the elderly and so on. And so what happens is that women over 65 largely take care of their grandchildren in Cyprus in the absence of state-provided quality and easily accessible services. Women are also dominate on contracts that are considered precarious, temporary contracts with no benefits and so on. And this is particularly acute also in academia, but also elsewhere, for example, domestic work. And why I mention the gender pension gap, because I think it's really important, is because women over 65 in Cyprus have one of the highest rates of risk of poverty than anywhere else in the EU. Okay, women in public and political decision-making. According to the Global Gender Gap Report 2020, Cyprus ranks 111th out of 153 countries in terms of political empowerment. And what we saw earlier in the AGA Gender Equality Index, our inequality in this domain is the most pronounced out of all other domains according to the index. Okay, so we perform almost the worst in comparison with other member states when it comes to women in political decision making. You can see some of our stats here, percentage of women in parliament, in municipal councils, board members of large companies, in the central bank board members, and of the Cyprus Olympic Committee and Executive Board, which I think is also important considering how the lack of policies for the prevention and handling of sexual harassment in sport that we've seen recently with the rise of the Me Too movement in Cyprus, and reports of sexual abuse and sexual harassment in this sector, among others. So what I want to say about women in public and political decision-making is that we're not seeing a steady sort of increase over time. What's interesting about the case of Cyprus is that we can't speak of trends because we kind of go backwards and forwards, right? So in 2006, we had a slight increase in women in parliament, and then then 5 years later, we had a decrease, and then we have a small increase, and then we have a decrease. So we can't see a steady upward trend, but in fact, sort of a situation where there is no real substantive improvement. Okay. Women in education and research is also an issue where the proportion of tertiary graduates we are among the most highly educated women in the world. We have some of the highest rates of tertiary graduates among women in Cyprus. And at the same time, and this connects very much to what I was saying earlier about segregation in the labor market, there is an uneven concentration of women and men in different study fields, which remains a huge challenge, again, because it reflects in the labor market and then it reflects in our the pension gap. 43% of women students are studying education, health and welfare, humanities and art, which are less valued and sectors where that pay less. We have the 4th lowest rate of women in higher education with higher education research with 37.6%. And again, as I mentioned before, we have one of the highest proportions of women employed under precarious contracts in higher education, right? And this is a benefit to employers who can very easily cut contracts short, don't have to pay benefits, don't have to pay maternity leave, and so on. And this is an issue that is extremely close to my heart. 35% of women in Cyprus have experienced physical and/or sexual violence in their lifetime. Sorry, this isn't in Cyprus. I'm giving you a global overview before I come to Cyprus. So this slide is looking at the global context. It's 35% of women who have experienced physical or sexual violence in their lifetime. Globally, 47% of murders of women are committed by intimate partners or family members. Just as was very shockingly and eloquently put by Leo earlier, women represent 55% of victims of forced labor and 98% of victims of sexual exploitation. I should say that in Cyprus, we're also a transit and destination country for women victims of trafficking, which is an issue that Migs has been working on since 2006. And globally, an estimated 200 million women have undergone FGM in 30 countries. Okay, and there's also the issue of child marriage. In Cyprus, we cannot claim to be in a better situation. In Cyprus, it's 1 in 5 women who have experienced physical or sexual violence by a partner or non-partner. According to the organization or the committee that I'm a president of that carried out the first locally or nationally conducted survey of domestic abuse in Cyprus, 28% of women who responded had experienced some form of domestic abuse, including economic, psychological, physical, or sexual. And many and often they experienced those forms of domestic abuse combined, because the domestic abuse is rarely is domestic abuse only one form, oftentimes, and most often, these forms of violence are experienced in combination, okay, as part of a pattern of coercive and controlling behavior. Between 2010 and 2016, there were 40 women killed because they are women, of which 70% were committed by current or ex-partners. Okay, that's 28. And that is, it might sound like a small number. Cyprus is a very small country. We're under 1 million in population. And this number corresponds to 4 women per year, 1 woman every 3 months, which is comparable to femicide rates in other large European countries such as Germany, Spain, and the UK. Okay, 36% of women report having experienced some form of sexual harassment since the age of 15. Okay, and migrant women, including domestic workers, refugee and asylum-seeking women, suffer multiple discrimination and are more vulnerable to violence, either institutional violence or interpersonal violence at every level. And I carried out, I couldn't put this on my slide, but I did carry out on behalf of Migs research last year on behalf of UNHCR that was looking at gender-based violence and sexual violence experienced by first arrival refugee and asylum-seeking women, and the rate of women arriving in Cyprus having experienced those forms of violence was over 50%. Okay. All right, a little bit of a lighter subject. Women's invisibility in the media is something that we take very seriously, whether it is quantitative visibility, whether they're in numbers, right, in the media, or qualitatively in how they are presented in the media. And Migs has been taking part in the global media monitoring project, I think for the last 15 years. It takes place every 5 years. It's a global effort that measures how women and men are presented in the media globally. So you can check it out. It's if you just Google it, you can find the reports. The last report was conducted in 2015. We've just finished our data collection for 2020. It's a little bit delayed because of the pandemic, and I am embargoed for presenting the results for this year. But I will say that what I can say is that there has been no real improvement. Okay, so just a few stats to give an idea. Women and men as news subjects, right? 81% men, 90% women. Okay. So women as news subjects in our 2015 report, I think there's a discrepancy here, but I'll check that out before I send you the final presentation. Corresponding journalists, 37%. Women at the center of news, 5%. 5%, right? It is a shockingly low number, okay? News presenting women as leaders, 9%, and that is not a surprise because we don't have women we don't have an adequate representation of women in leadership in Cyprus. News, we also look at news that challenge gender stereotypes, only 2%, which means that most news is present their stories about women and men in gender stereotypical ways, okay? News highlighting gender equality, 1%, right? And what do we mean by that? We mean news stories, right, that that tell stories about or showcase issues of inequality between women and men. And as we can see, it is almost non-existent, right? We also have sexist stereotypes in the media. This is in Greek, but I'll just give a little overview. When one of our most prominent MPs, who came first on her ballot in Larnaca in the last election, was presenting in a news program or in a panel on national television, what the news, instead of covering what she was saying, were covering how she was dressed and the fact that she was showing her cleavage, okay? In issues of peace and security is a big issue in Cyprus, obviously because of our history of ethnic conflict and the dominance of our peace negotiations in the news and on our political agenda. And you can see from the photo here who dominates the peace talks and our negotiations in Cyprus, okay? And this is, when I had Leo presenting it, also was interesting to look at this feminist security perspective, because precisely if there are no women who are involved in peace talks and peace negotiations and involved in the resolution of the Cyprus problem, that means that what we mean by peace and what we mean by security is not influenced by women's perspectives. And just as Leo was presenting earlier, it is not human-centered. It is state security and not human security, right? So at the political level, women's presence is minimal. And I showed you a picture, a photo of who dominates our peace negotiations earlier. But at the activist level, okay, action in civil society, the number is increasing, right? Women dominate civil society activism. And this is interesting, and it's a wider conversation and can be had at another time. But what does this tell us about the pyramid of power? And what does this tell us about how we understand the concept of power? Okay, because a feminist concept of power is that it is not hierarchical, okay, and it is not limited, right? Feminists believe that power is in abundance, right? And but we have an extremely patriarchal and hierarchical understanding of the concept of power in Cyprus, right? So looking also at the impact of COVID-19, and I really felt that I needed to mention this because this pandemic threatens to restrict or roll back women and girls' fundamental rights, and any progress that we claim to have seen over the last years. And in fact, it just sort of, as everything sort of fell apart, it revealed many of the inequalities that we thought we had addressed, but in fact we had not. Okay, and one really good example is that as soon as the restrictions came and our kindergartens were closed and we were separated from our extended families, we found that women had to pick up the care work, right, at disproportionate levels. So fundamentally, right, the division of domestic labor between women and men had not fundamentally changed, okay? So for me, this was a real eye-opener. Severe job losses, okay? We already talked about the existing inequalities in the labor market. During the first wave of the pandemic, employment for women across the EU, we don't have a lot of data for Cyprus yet, employment for women reduced by 2.2 million, okay, across the EU. Women working in retail, accommodation, residential care, domestic work, clothing manufacturing suffered heavy losses, right? They make up the bulk of the workforce in these sectors, precisely because there is gender segregation in employment and in labor sectors, right? So 40% of all jobs lost by women during the crisis were in these professions, okay? I've already talked about how women disproportionately bear the burden of home and family care, this invisible work that is not paid and is not valued, right? When we talk about our economy and our GDP, we do not take into account women's unpaid care work, right? So, you have to go. Turn it off. Sorry, my daughter just entered the room, which makes my point. So, so women are doubly invisible, okay, ignored, and particularly migrant women, domestic workers, refugees and asylum seekers suffered enormously, particularly in Cyprus, and I'm sure many of you are aware of that, during the first lockdown and continue to do so. Right. And of course, these vulnerabilities compounded by dramatic increase of gender-based violence and domestic violence. We saw reports of domestic violence skyrocket during the first lockdown. In Cyprus, it was increased by 58%, okay, without adequate state-provided assistance, right? So we didn't see the state move in to provide that kind of assistance for victims of violence against women. It was some efforts were made, but often it was too little, too late, which basically tells us that we were not prepared, right? Because we've been talking about violence against women and the need for adequate support measures for years, protection measures, support, and justice through the criminal justice system. And in fact, when during times of crisis, when we see many of these inequalities and violence exacerbate, that is when you realize how little had been done to put those mechanisms in place for us to be able to deal with these problems as they arise. Okay, so I'm going to now, I've given a little bit of an overview of where women's rights stand in some of the sectors that we work on in Cyprus. There's many more. I can talk about young women, we can talk about elderly women, we can talk about LGBTQ rights, and the list goes on. But this gives just some taste of where we are. So what does my organization do, or what we're trying to do? And it's really encouraging to me, and I have to say, to see organizations like the Humanitarian aid programs spring up, because we really feel that at some point we're going to have to pass the baton, right? And so it is really encouraging to see young people getting involved in activism and doing so in such a sort of nuanced and in such a nuanced way, and using such sort of solid analysis. So that is really encouraging for us to see. So what does Migs do? As I mentioned earlier, we're not a service provision organization. We don't provide direct services to victims of violence, for example. What we do is we work on research, right? So Migs project, and then they're all related, and I'll explain a little bit about how these tie in together a little towards the end of the presentation. Migs projects and activities all rely on evidence-based research that we carry out, and data collection. So beyond the reports we regularly publish, which you can see on our website, research plays a key role in all aspects of our work, from the trainings we conduct, the awareness raising campaigns we run, to the advocacy and lobbying we do to bring about real change in policy and legislation. So without data, we cannot make our case. Okay? So data is really important to us, particularly in Cyprus, where that kind of data, disaggregated data and feminist research is so scarce, okay? So we wouldn't call what we do academic research, it's action research. It is research in order to take action, okay? So our analysis deploys established feminist methodologies to better understand gender inequality, about change, to concretely improve the lives of women and girls. It also contributes to, as I said, more widely to the growing knowledge base on gender equality and women's rights in Cyprus, which, as I mentioned, is quite scarce. So that was research. Educating youth and training professionals. Since 2006, we've worked tirelessly to implement training programs targeting the private and public sectors, as well as civil society, to raise awareness, increase capacity, develop skills among frontline and other professionals, for example, social welfare workers, the police, teachers, educators, health workers. And more recently, we began offering gender equality training to professionals in the private sector in Cyprus. We also work to promote gender equality among youth, mainly through school-based interventions. I think I mentioned this in the beginning of my presentation. We've been mainly working at training teachers and educators to integrate a gender perspective in their teaching, no matter what they teach, be it math, sports, sort of biology, chemistry. We believe that you can integrate a gender perspective across the education system and in all subjects. And so we want to promote sort of gender sensitive teaching throughout the school curriculum. We also look at education textbooks, teaching methodologies as well, to see how that might create unwittingly bias, gender bias, and gender stereotypes. Raising awareness and campaigning on key issues. Okay, when we work to smash the patriarchy, we do it on many fronts. Raising awareness about women's rights and gender equality is often the first step, as long as we have our evidence and our data. We take actions like training and engaging with media professionals. We've also helped the Radio and Television Authority in Cyprus to update their gender equality code, and training media professionals on to engage in less biased reporting in very practical terms. Carrying out visible media campaigns, professional training programs, in order to promote positive perceptions and greater social awareness on gender equality issues. And finally, just as awareness raising is key in shaping social attitudes, lobbying and advocacy are essential in bringing out substantive change on a legal and regulatory level. That's why we consider influencing policymaking and legislating in the area of women's rights to be a core activity of our NGO. And just to give some examples, we helped the Ministry of Justice draft the first comprehensive violence against women bill in Cyprus. Although that was 3 years ago, it was to comply with the standards of the Istanbul Convention, which is the Council of Europe Convention on the prevention and combating of violence against women and domestic violence. And it has been 3 years in the making. It is still stuck in the law services for a legal review, and it has not yet been submitted to Parliament, but we're still hopeful. Another example is working with members of Parliament to criminalize the use of sex services from victims of trafficking, which is another issue that is very close to our heart. We're abolitionists, and we believe that addressing the demand side of trafficking is essential to eradicating trafficking in women and girls. And our first step was to work on criminalizing the buying of sex from victims of trafficking, which we succeeded in 2018. Another example would be another issue very close to our heart was the recognition of the right of women to abortion, which we also of course, not single-handedly, but in cooperation with other organizations and policymakers, managed to decriminalize just a few years back. So this is what we've been doing, innovating through research, increasing awareness and action, influencing law and policy. We try to foster vibrant and diverse networks on a national, regional, European level. We were founding members of the Cyprus Women's Lobby, which is the national coordination that are members of the European Women's Lobby, which is the largest network of women's organizations in Europe. And we tried to create, in this way, a community of change. These are other things that we have done, which I won't get into. Some of our impact in numbers, which our donors love to see, but which we don't find that important, but there it is. We try to forge sort of working relationships with the Cyprus government by participating in various committees. We've also withdrawn from committees when we felt that we were not being heard and we were not being treated as equal partners. Consultation with civil society is a core value of the European Union, and when it's not done properly, we walk away from the table. Okay, and building coalitions. This is extremely important for us to be able to coordinate and mobilize with organizations across Europe and across the region. These are some of the organizations that we're members of. At the moment, I'm a board member of the Women Against Violence in Europe network that works exclusively on violence against women and girls and domestic abuse. We were founding members of the European Network of Migrant Women and the NDFGN European Network as well. So, and this is just some images of some of the things that, and some of the activism that we've done in the past. This was our campaigning for women in the parliamentary and local elections in 2011. Our participation in the 1 Billion Rising campaign, which was founded by Eve Ensler, the author of the Vagina Monologues. Media policy advocacy and our media interventions, training of professionals, and our youth work. I haven't shown any pictures because I didn't get the permission to show pictures of our wonderful youth groups, but this is some of the work that they have done. Okay. And the motto we go by: the rights of women and girls is the unfinished business of the 21st century. And it continues to be so. Okay, so that's the end of my presentation. Thank you very much. I look forward to answering any questions that you may have.
Thank you very much, Susana, for your really insightful presentation and for sharing the incredible work that Migs do. I will say one more time, the last time today, if anyone's listening and they would like to answer any questions or ask any questions, please put them in the chat box below. And now it's time for the Q&A session. I will start by reading the chat box questions, and then if we have any time left, I will ask if there's anyone who wishes to ask questions directly. And if they wish to do so, please let us know in the chat box by typing, I would like to ask a question. And then I will unmute you. I'd just like to ask that all the speakers would put their cameras on before we start. And if Susana could stop sharing her screen, if that's okay. Is Angelina here? Could you switch her camera on? Oh, great. Has Susana lost connection, or is she present?
I did lose connection and I'm back, and I'm just trying to stop sharing my screen. Has my screen been disabled? Is it okay?
It's okay now. Thank you.
All right, brilliant. Thanks. Sorry.
It's okay. I'm just going to go through the questions that I see on the chat box. So the first question that I see is, how do you tackle women's unemployment? Is your organization conscious and deliberate about employing women? And I believe that is addressed to Susana, that question.
Shall I answer now, or you want to take up the question?
Yeah? Yes, you can answer now. It's the Q&A session now.
Very simple. It's a really simple answer. Yes, we do hire very consciously and very deliberately. We hire women, and I'm very happy to say that one of the most inspiring parts of working at Migs has been having women start out their careers at Migs and then still be with us 10 or 15 years later, and really building an incredible wealth of experience and expertise, and watching them grow and develop. And that's something that's really important to Migs, is to provide these opportunities. We're an NGO which usually it is not the most lucrative of sectors to work in. So it's really important for us that we provide every opportunity to the young women within our organization as possible to network, to develop, to gain expertise. Being involved in also in projects at the European level, on a regional level. And I will say that we have not hired any men so far, and that is not because of, before I'm accused of gender bias, although it would be, in my case, I believe it would be positive. It would be positive action, but men have not expressed interest in working for our organization. So we'll see that and I think this is changing over the last few years in terms of human rights activism, that there are more and more men involved, but traditionally, and every time we have an opening, it is usually women who feel very, very strongly about contributing to this kind of work. And I think it's perfectly natural.
Thank you. We also have a question that says, how do we address transgender women in women's sports? I'm not sure who this would be directed to specifically. So if anyone from the panel would like to answer that question, Susana, Angelina, and Leo, if anyone's interested in answering this question.
Shall I go ahead?
Okay.
What a question. This is a question, the issue of transgender women in areas, sectors such as women's sports that have been reserved for women traditionally, and have been considered this is a massive question, and one of the most dividing questions in the feminist movement at the moment. Okay, I have to do so. I have to answer the question with caution, because there are very diverse opinions on this. Personally, I feel that there needs to be open debate about this. I think that we need, as a society and in our public discourse, there needs to be open debate and consultation with women, okay, and women in the feminist movement about what could be the impact of the inclusion of trans women in women's sports, as in other areas such as women's prisons, women's shelters, single-sex toilets and things like that. This is a huge debate that is raging in most countries in Europe, in Australia, in the United States, in the UK. And my take on it, because my organization hasn't taken a strong position on this yet, because we're still looking at the data, what we feel is that there needs to be open, honest debate about what the impact may be on women's safe spaces, including women's sports, before any decision is taken. Okay, so and there needs to be evidence around that as well. And I think that all sides need to be heard. This is why I'm taking a kind of diplomatic stance on this, because I really feel that this has been an extremely divisive issue that can do only harm. And when the women's movement is divided, it can only harm us, right? And the patriarchy is laughing. The patriarchy is laughing. So I really feel that we need to tone down the polarity in this discussion, and we need to, in good faith, have this discussion, right? So that's how I feel about it.
Thank you for your answer. We have another question. Is it also perceived that men bring greater stability to their jobs where women may not stay as long as men? I think this question was posted when it was Susana's presentation. So Susana wishes to answer the question.
Okay, can you repeat the question, Phoebe?
Of course. Is it also perceived that men bring greater stability to their jobs, where women may not stay as long as men?
Right. This is a myth, right? This is the perception. She's absolutely right. Whoever put the question, thank you for asking it. It is perceived that men provide more stability, that they're more likely to stay. Why? Because they're less likely to take leave, because family leave, maternity leave, parental leave, right? And that might be true. Men don't go on maternity leave. This is women's right to take leave after they give birth and to take care of their newborn. However, it is untrue that women are more likely to leave. In fact, there is some data, and I can't reference it now because I don't have it in front of me. There is data that shows that, in fact, women are more likely to stay for the longer term, because women are more likely, because of our role in society and sort of as caretakers of our families and so on. So I mean, I'm fully aware that these are gender roles and stereotypes, yes, but because of our gender, right, and because of gender expectations and socializations, women are more likely to stay longer, right, and take less risks when it comes to their career decisions, right? Traditionally speaking, okay, of course there are exceptions, right? But I'm saying by and large, women are more likely to stay, okay, particularly when their employer supports them and they are offered what they're entitled to in terms of rights with maternity and with maternity leave, yeah, and equal pay and so on.
Thank you.
I hope that answers the question.
Oh, if you have any more clarifications, you can comment on the chat box below. We have a question for Angelina. The message says, isn't it illegal to have gender wage disparities? Perhaps in some areas in the private sector, there is inequality where salary audit is not carefully considered. And I think that they're asking for your opinion and your perspective on this.
So it is illegal, but as I said during my presentation, that if there are objective differences and the employer can prove that this discrimination could be justified because of an objective difference, such as, for example, if a representative of female gender is pregnant and she cannot complete particular tasks, or, for example, if the nature of the job requires them to hire only representatives of male gender, for example, again, because of the physical nature of the representative of female gender, then no, it cannot be considered as illegal. But once again, it is a very sensitive topic which can be proven only by an employer that what he has done, his act, doesn't fall under the scope of gender discrimination, but falls more under the scope of objective difference, that he didn't have an intention to discriminate just because she's a woman, but just because of this nature of the job. So it can be illegal if an employer, for example, will not be able to prove that indeed he had this objective difference when he was choosing, for example, the person to hire.
Thank you, Angelina, for your answer. We also have a question for Leo. The question says, what is the difference between smuggling and human trafficking?
Thank you, Phoebe. Thank you for the question. Before I answer the question, I would like to say I am the minority in this conference, and I admire the great women that I've been working with throughout the past 1.5 hours. The difference between people smuggling and human trafficking is quite simple. Basically, human smuggling is the crime against the borders. The victims, they may be voluntary. in doing so. As for the human trafficking, it is basically involuntary, and it focuses on the victim itself being trafficked. In this case, human trafficking mostly refers to transnational trafficking from one country to another. This is the basic idea. There are some details, but to give a large picture, this is it. Thank you.
Thank you very much for your answer. I've just seen a new question. I believe this is for Susana. How can we as women help decrease gender discrimination? Because from what I have seen, whenever a woman tries to speak about it, the majority of men who feel uncomfortable about the particular topic try to keep them silent.
Yeah, thank you for the question. Support other women. Talk to other women. Okay, I really feel very strongly about this because there's been a lot of sort of, I would say, donor directed, if you like, that we need to, and we absolutely do, this is not wrong, we need to talk to men and boys, right? But in Cyprus, we have not yet raised our own women's collective consciousness around the discrimination and violation of rights that we've experienced. This has only happened recently, and it's not enough. Okay, so I think that one thing we can do in Cyprus, but I think elsewhere as well, is to still, this right to assembly that we have among women to discuss our own experiences, to mobilize, form coalitions, and strategize for how we're going to move forward, whether it's even in a micro level or at the macro level. I really think that it can be a very, very lonely place to be in a room with men, trying to talk to them about discrimination that we face from men, right? Or from a male-dominated and patriarchal society. So I think that it is really important to mobilize with other women and support other women.
Thank you for your answer. We have another question for Leo. I think it's following on from the previous question. The question says, yes, Leo, the voluntary element is usually used as a differentiating factor, but don't you think the line is blurry sometimes? For example, those who pay to be smuggled end up being trafficked.
Thank you for the question. Yes, the line is blurred in many cases. Therefore, what we could see is that women or girls, they may be tricked or receiving deception before going into another country for work. They may believe that they're going abroad for working in a restaurant or any other establishments. However, it turned that human traffickers lured them into a sexual exploitation business. Of course, the line is blurred. What I have mentioned earlier is that, generally speaking, the basic definition for research is that smuggling, when we refer to this term, it is about the crime against the borders. Whereas trafficking, we're describing the transnational criminal activities or behaviors themselves. This is the basic differentiation, and I do agree with you that the line is sometimes very blurry, and that is why this topic is very important and interesting to investigating. Thank you.
Thank you very much for your answer, Leo. I just want to mention that a few people just made some statements of how they really liked your presentations, and in particular, they found Leo's presentation really interesting, and they haven't had the opportunity to hear about this topic before. So thank you, Leo, for that. And Susana, many people were interested about the fresh data that you presented. They found that very interesting, and they, again, have not had access to that information before. And Angelina, a lot of people were very impressed with your knowledge and depth of the topic that you were presenting on. It was incredible. Thank you very much. I would like to give people the option, if they would like to do a direct question, we can switch your camera on and unmute you if you are interested. Please let us know on the chat. If no one isn't, okay, we have a question. I think it's from Todi. Yes.
Yes, I have a question for Susana. I just wanted to ask, where do you draw the line between respect for culture and protecting women's rights? Because you mentioned FGM, and in many cultures in the global south, FGM is a recognized cultural practice, even performed by women. And so I just want to know, where do you draw the line to say, I'm going to respect the culture of people that, you know, the culture should be respected, but then how do I also protect the rights of women within this culture?
Yeah, what a great question. Yeah, this is, in fact, when we started, we were invited to be involved in this campaign, because the FGM network started as a campaign run by Amnesty International Ireland, right? And then it culminated into the development of the network. Right? And I remember when it was in 2005, when we were contacted, I said, we don't know anything about FGM, and we shouldn't be involved in this. You know, it says, you know, thank you so much for inviting us, but you know, we don't even know if FGM is taking place in Cyprus. We don't, you know. And they were like, no. We would like to have you guys on board. We'd like to have you guys on board. And it was an incredible learning experience for us, because we were able to develop, to learn, right? So I cannot claim to be an expert, right, on FGM. In fact, my colleague Christina Kylie is our contact point, and she's been working on FGM with the network over the last 10 years. But it's an excellent question that you pose, and you know, according to the Istanbul Convention, we cannot excuse human rights violations and violations against women by calling upon culture and tradition. Okay, so that is a sort of the standard, the principle, right? But you're absolutely right that it is not a question of, you know, white women preaching about human rights violations, right? That take place, you know, in many Arab and African countries, but I should say not only because it's taking place in Europe to a great extent, and it's also taking place in the United States. But I think the how do we draw the line? We work with community-based organizations, right? This was the most important, I think, step that the network took, because we're a network of many organizations, was to work with grassroots organizations that are community-based, right? So that it is about building community activism around FGM, and not us doing activism on behalf of, right? So I think that for me, this was for us key in us being involved, because we, even though, yes, we work on, you know, women's rights for us are involve all women, okay? And it's important for us that we recognize the particular vulnerabilities and inequalities and intersectional inequalities that all women face. But it's really important for us that the women affected are involved, right? And have their own independent voice and are telling us how we should be working on it, right? And this is what the network does, and that's how we build that expertise, right? And negotiate, because it's only community leaders and women in the community that can negotiate that line, not us. I hope that makes sense.
Thank you very much for your detailed answer. That was great. We've not received any more questions. So I'd like to say a big thank you to everyone who has attended and participated today at our event. I would like to give a special thank you to our guest speakers, Leo Lin and Angelina Aliabiba, and our keynote speaker, Susana Pavlou, for taking time out of their busy schedules today to produce incredible presentations that inspire and educate us all. Once again, I wish you a happy International Women's Day for tomorrow, and I hope to see you soon at another event that we will host. Thank you very much, and I hope you all have a lovely day. Thank you.
Thank you so much. Bye.
Thank you.